Extremity by Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer is a book I've been wanting to cover since the first issue. There's so much narrative playfulness built into the issues, it was hard deciding what to spotlight. There is a page, however, in the fourth issue of Extremity that sums up a few of the elements I really like about what Johnson and Spicer do here, specifically this page. It looks quite straightforward on the face of it, but there's some really quite clever stuff happening here. So in this episode, I'm going to go through what makes this page really stand out in the work of Extremity. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So to help add some context, what we've got here is two characters, Dag and Jerome. There's some history, but specifically Dag and Jerome belong to different clans of people at a sort of war with each other. Jerome has arrived to most likely kill Dag. He's arrived just outside Dag's home, on Dag's land. Often when I've talked about comic framing choices, I've used cinema as an obvious comparison, but here it feels more specifically like a video game. In the opening two panels, we have two contenders established. They even say each other's name. And when we pull out in that third panel, we get an idea of quite where we are. The battleground stage is set, and then the chaos erupts towards the end. But you can see that left and right divide quite obviously. The camera or the framing choice never crosses over to allow Dag or Jerome to switch sides, and we never place them in a moment together throughout the entire page. This whole thing is separated. The camera never breaks the line from where it's placed at the top of the page, and you can see that even in the flashback panel. Here's a sort of very crude diagram of what happens with the framing choices in each panel, so you can see the camera never breaks that line it's being moved around on until the very last one, when Jerome lunges at Dag, and suddenly the camera swings right around here. But Johnson is keeping you as an audience member at a certain perspective, at a certain distance from the action, and then he quickly jolts you around and jams you right into it. And you can see the distance that keeps you at, because you're never actually part of that moment. You're very clearly a sort of spectator in the same way as a video game. You're not really the one fighting, but you're just watching from the side. There seems to be a very specific feeling here of being removed from the action. So when we get that final panel at the bottom, and we're right in the face of Jerome, that actually ends up hitting us pretty hard. Because suddenly now we're literally right in the middle of the moment, right in Jerome's face, in his anger, we can feel it. This distance is also reflective of the feelings of Jerome and Dag in this scene, because initially there's an uncertainty in the air. For both of them, there's a feeling they don't really want to be doing this. It's only when Jerome has that flashback moment, when Dag tells him he's sorry for the death, that's when it gets personal again. That's what kicks the whole thing off. So it makes sense to now get us involved in this, and it does make it more personal for us as readers. It removes that distance we've been placed at. And this effect is also doubled down by the way Johnson frames the two men. In the opening row, they share that same row, but they're placed at very extremes of the page, right across from each other, left and right. That distance is really noticeable, and Russ Wooten's letters sitting between them help show that distance. But the big empty panels, the lack of a background, it means there's nothing else to see here but those two men. So you have to pull your eye across the whole width of the page to find the next thing to look at, which is pretty much all the space that Johnson actually has to work with. You can see how they're almost falling off the panels, and this is repeated in the third row, where the effect is exactly the same, but the camera is just pushing in on them individually. They're still divided by that panel gutter, and that helps amplify that distance of them by not sharing the same framing, and they're being shoved right to the panel edges. The second row full width panel is exactly the same, the distance amplified, and the gutter is now recreated in essence by the placement of all those speech balloons straight down the middle, which creates another visual divide between the two men. The page is working really hard to sell this effect to us, but it does work, and it's one of the very few things the page is actually doing in those three rows in terms of Johnson's line work. It's not muddying up the storytelling by doing too much. It's chosen one effect, and it triples down on that to give the final moment of Jerome lunging that intended punch. Brilliant stuff, honestly, because Johnson has essentially spent nearly 2/3 of a page showing you the exact same thing, and not even with tons of dialogue either. But what we're dealing with is a visual medium here, so he's laying down the groundwork for the reader response that would otherwise be on the nose if it was told through dialogue. But it never gets in the way of the rest of the page. The other thing that stood out to me on this page, which also does help with that same overall effect, is Spicer's choice of palette. Jerome and Dag's clans both have face markings to identify them. Jerome's is red, Dag's is green. Without much effort, you'll be able to see the general palette of the page is yellow and green, moving to orange and then red at the bottom of the page. The great thing is that the green and red sit directly opposite each other on the colour wheel, very much like Dag and Jerome. They're opposing colours. I can't imagine that that's accidental. And yellow, the dominant colour in the opening of the page, sits next to green on the colour wheel, which again means they work together. They're complementary colours. So the opening palette, you have two colours that sit next to each other, green and yellow, and that firmly roots us in the world of Dag. This is clearly his home, it's part of his clan, and Jerome's red is nowhere to be seen, except a little slither of it on his face. And that's representative of what we've just been looking at with the way that the camera weight shifts around for the end shot of Jerome too, right? Then we get the flashback, and the yellow starts to blend into the orange, which again are next to each other on the colour wheel. green to yellow to orange. But that leads us nicely into the red of the final panel, as again, red and orange now sit next to each other on the colour wheel. So what you're seeing is the palette slowly start to swing around to Jerome's colours as he lunges. It goes from that green to the yellow to the orange to Jerome's red. It's like the weight shifts and Dag and his green through to the orange into Jerome's anger, bloodlust and clan. And that's representative of what we've just been looking at with the way the camera weight shifts around at the end of the shot too, right? You're seeing elements of the page all start to work together to build this final moment. And it makes the whole page a single unit of storytelling within a larger comic book too, because it has this beginning, middle and end throughout it. And when you can craft each page of a comic with thought and attention like this, it shows a real grasp of understanding of the medium. There's a clear idea represented on the page, clear response as readers that we should be getting, and it's all done in a way that doesn't interrupt the story or our flow as readers. It's just controlled, clever work. Thanks for watching. Strip Panel Naked works because of the amazing patrons that help support the series on the Patreon page. Massive thanks to those. For their support, they get tons and tons and tons of extra content updated every single week. If you're interested, please check out the page and consider supporting. For more comics talk and analysis, you can find me on Twitter at HassanOE. And finally, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest content, and we'll see you next time.